Hola amores, welcome back to my channel and welcome to another VBX Familia Speaks as well as a Cultures of the Americas video. Now this video is in response to a request that I received to talk about the Spanish settlements of the American Midwest. Now, of course, these are not all of the Spanish settlements of North America, and again, I will be focusing a little more on the Midwest. When it comes to the Spanish exploration, conquest, settlements, and colonization of the Americas, we tend to focus very much on Mexico, the Caribbean, Central and South America. However, sometimes we forget about the initial Spanish settlements in what is now the United States. Spain explored and conquered vast territories ranging from North Carolina on the American East Coast to Alaska on the northwest tip of the subcontinent. In between, some of these regions would also include California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and Alabama. The Spanish claim to the territories that are today the United States rested upon the 16th century exploits of Ponce de León, Hernando de Soto, and Francisco Vázquez de Coronado. St. Augustine in Florida was established as a Spanish fort in 1565, the first permanent settlement in what would become the United States. The Spanish were also the first Europeans to explore and to establish a settlement in what is now Virginia. The English settlements in Virginia in 1607 were over 80 years too late to be the first colony started by Europeans on the North American continent, and roughly 40 years too late to be called the first colony started by Europeans in Virginia. Lucas Vázquez de Ayllón, born in Toledo, Spain in 1475, was a judge of the royal courts of Santo Domingo and a sugar courier on the island of Españoles. In 1526, he prepared an expedition of 600 people that departed from the ports of Santo Domingo and headed north. In their first stopover near Cape Fear, they could not do anything because of the muddy and swampy terrain. They continued further north to the present Chesapeake Bay in Virginia, to which they gave the name of Santa Maria. Now going back down to Georgia, they founded San Miguel de Guadalupe in October of 1526, more than a century before the arrival of the Pilgrim Fathers of the Mayflower. This settlement, however, did not prove to be successful, and after several months of hunger and disease, coupled with the non-collaboration and hostility of the natives, the majority of the survivors repackaged and returned to Santo Domingo. Greater progress, however, was made by the Spanish on the other side of the continent. In 1598, Don Juan Oñate led 500 men from Mexico northward into Pueblo lands in present-day New Mexico. These settlers brought with them a labor system known as the encomienda, which had originally developed in Spain. Oñate, fired by a passion for precious metals, launched a series of explorations eastward into present-day Kansas and Oklahoma, and westward to the Gulf of California. In some instances, he retraced Coronado's steps and was equally unsuccessful in discovering gold and silver. Now focusing on some of the more notable establishments of the Spanish, new settlements were erected at Santa Fe in 1609 and nearby Taos in 1615. Santa Fe, where many Pueblo villages were located, became the capital of the Kingdom of New Mexico, an outpost of the larger Spanish Viceroyalty of New Spain, which had its headquarters in Mexico City. The Spanish would face much resistance for the Pueblo people. In 1680, the Pueblo launched a coordinated rebellion against the Spanish, which killed over 400 Spaniards and drove the rest of the settlers south towards Mexico. However, in 1692, the Spanish returned and reasserted their control of the area. The nearby Taos Valley in New Mexico, home of the Tiwa-speaking Taos Indians, was first discovered by the Spanish in 1540 during the explorations of Hernando de Alvarado, an officer of the Coronado expedition. The town of Taos was established in 1615 as Don Fernando de Taos, following the Spanish conquest of the Indian Pueblo villages. Initially, relations of the Spanish settlers with the Taos Pueblo were amicable, but resentment of meddling by missionaries and demands by encomenderos for tributes led to a revolt in 1640. During the 1770s, Taos was repeatedly raided by Comanches Indians, and in 1779, Juan Bautista de Anza, governor of the province of New Mexico, led a successful punitive expedition against the Comanches. Between 1780 and 1800, Don Fernando de Taos was established. The Don Fernando de Taos land grant gave land to 63 Spanish families in the Taos Valley. Now moving northward, the San Luis Valley is a region in south-central Colorado with a small portion overlapping into New Mexico. The Spanish began exploring the San Luis Valley during the late 1500s, and it would become a northern frontier of the Spanish Empire. In an attempt to get people to settle the area, Mexico established numerous land grants within the Spanish territory. Extensive settlement began in the valley, primarily by Hispanic farmers and ranchers from New Mexico in the 1850s, after the construction of Fort Massachusetts by the U.S. Army for protection against the native Utes, who previously barred settlers. Settlers built a church in the village that is now called San Luis and dedicated it on the Feast of St. Louis, June 21, 1851. Today, the valley has the largest native Hispanic population in Colorado. Many families are directly descended from the original New Mexican settlers. And now coming back down south to San Antonio, beginning in the 1680s, the Spanish initiated a series of expeditions or entradas into Texas to combat French intrusions into the region. In 1690, Alonso de Leon escorted several Catholic missionaries to East Texas, where they established the first mission in Texas. When native tribes resisted the Spanish invasion of their homeland, the missionaries returned to Mexico, abandoning Texas for the next 2 decades. The Spanish returned to southeast Texas in 1716, establishing several missions and a presidio to maintain a buffer between Spanish territory and the French colonial Louisiana districts of New France. In 1718, the first civilian settlement was established in San Antonio. The city of San Antonio is one of the first European settlements in Texas and was for decades its largest city. Spanish control of Texas was followed by Mexican control of Texas, and it can be sometimes difficult to separate the Mexican and Spanish influences on the future state. The most obvious legacy is that of the language. Many of the words that have been incorporated into American English, such as canyon, ranch, and plaza, come from Spanish words. The landscape of Texas was changed as a result of some Spanish policies. As early as the 1690s, Spaniards brought European livestock, including cattle, horses, and mules with them on their expeditions throughout the province. Spanish farmers also introduced tiling and irrigation to the land, further changing the landscape. Spanish architectural concepts were also adopted by those in Texas, including the addition of patios, tile floors and roofs, arched windows and doorways, carved wooden doors, and wrought iron grillwork. There is also a lot of shared history and culture among the northernmost states of Mexico and the Midwest U.S., including the states of Baja California, Sonora, and Chihuahua. The settlers in these areas comprised of mainly criollos, which were American-born descendants of Spaniards, mestizos, half-natives, and castizos, quarter-natives, who were farmers and continued practicing the traditions of the Spanish. Some also came from the same line of the Spanish that had settled in the Midwest but were forced back into Mexico once the Anglo-Americans had taken over those states. Along with the Spanish came to the U.S. traditions which would become staple images of the American West in history, particularly the image of the vaquero, or the cowboy. Vaquero is a Spanish word for a herder of cattle. It derives from the word vaca, meaning cow. The vaquero became the foundation for the North American cowboy. During the 16th century, the conquistadors and other Spanish settlers brought their cattle-raising traditions, as well as both horses and domesticated cattle, into the Americas. The origins of the vaquero tradition can be traced back to the hacienda system of medieval Spain. This style of cattle ranching spread throughout much of the Iberian Peninsula and later was imported to the Americas. Both regions possessed a dry climate with sparse grass, and thus large herds of cattle required vast amounts of land in order to obtain sufficient forage. The need to cover distances greater than a person on foot could manage gave rise to the development of the horseback-mounted vaquero. Various aspects of the Spanish equestrian tradition can be traced back to Arabic rule in Spain, including Moorish elements such as the use of Oriental-type horses, the jineta riding style characterized by a shorter stirrup, solid treed saddle, and use of spurs, as well as other horse-related equipment and techniques.
Somewhere around the 1600s, Spaniards came into Texas. They were excellent horsemen. and develop a ranching industry. By 1830, there were some very well-established ranches. Alonso de León, José Antonio Navarro, Juan Seguín, Bernardo Gutiérrez de Lara, José de Escandón, and all these guys had some very, very large spreads that they handled with vaquero team. The vaqueros taught the Anglos about cowboy. When the Anglos came into Texas in 1830, they had those little British riding saddles, no saddle horn. They came in and they see these vaqueros that have their saddles, they have the tapaderas that cover their feet so they protect them from the brush. They had the chaps, the chivarras, to protect their legs.
Vaqueros came from the word vaca, a Spanish word for cow. And the bandana was used not only to keep you warm in winter around your neck, but to wipe down your sweat and sometimes your blood as well.
A sombrero. The ring of spurs.
The first cowboys in the New World were, of course, Spanish and later Mexican vaqueros, and we owe these cultures a great debt for methods of working cattle, their horsemanship, their ability to handle the riata and lasso, and so much of what we have associated with American cowboys was handed to them through vaqueros.
The mounted Spaniards followed a long ancestry of world-class horsemen that also included strong ties to the Africans and Moors by virtue of Mediterranean trade routes. Centuries of skill had evolved into a remarkable style of equestrian culture. In the early United States, the Spanish hands on the horse and cow would evolve again. As the first major European power in the Americas, Spain introduced the horse and the cow into Mexico, hundreds of years before the birth of the American cowboy. Much of who the cowboy is today, from his clothing to his equipment, to roping and riding techniques and even language, comes from Spanish ancestry.
Alright everyone, and that concludes this video on the Spanish of the American Midwest. As always, I hope that you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye!